All right, it's noon and we will get started. People will probably join as we go, but this session is being recorded. So hello and welcome to the SQL Server Health Checks, the worst offenders session. So this is, I'm Mike Walsh from Straight Path. We'll talk about us in a second and what we hope to see. So make sure I actually change my slide right. So who is Straight Path Solutions? Well, we're a SQL Server consultancy, and we do two main things. We do managed services. We call it a senior DBA as a service. A lot of clients use us to sort of either be their DBA team or to sort of work alongside their DBA team and help them out as sort of a force multiplier. So the DBAs can actually take a vacation, which is rare in the DBA world. Straight Path never takes vacations, although our team members do from time to time. And then we do a lot of bucket of hours type consulting as well, where somebody can buy a bucket of 20 or 40 hours or whatever they need. And we'll do tuning, help make things better, fix problems, deal with corruption, development help, whatever they need, really. If it's a SQL Server DBA or DBA aligned task. On the team, we have a lot of different SQL Server gurus with different specialties. And actually, we're joined by quite a few of them here. Not the full team, but we're joined by, I have to count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's six. 6, including me. 6 of my colleagues here at Straight Path are joining for the Q&A, which will follow. We do a lot of SQL Server Health checks, which means we see a lot of things that aren't great. And we're going to talk about those things today. And we're going to focus in on 7 things that we just want to stop seeing. And we're going to give you the tips so you can prevent these things yourself. Who am I? Well, I'm the owner of Straight Path. I'm a founder of this company. I'm a father, a husband, and a friend. I'm oldish, I guess. I used to have a full head of hair before I started working with SQL Server. It went away someplace. I used to have reddish beard. Now it's whitish. I've been doing SQL Server work since version 6.5 for about 25 years now. And I've done a lot of health checks myself, and I've been blogging since about 2008 and speaking at SQL Server events. And if you have a SQL Server Health check question, obviously we're a company. You can buy services from us, but I don't care if you buy services from us today. I just want to help you fix these 7 things and prevent them. So if you sort of download the links, which if you look at the chat, I put a link there, which actually has a blog post that I put out yesterday on our blog. It's the most recent blog post, and it will have all the links we're going to talk about. All the links that I already have in the slides are there. So you don't have to worry about writing things down or trying to screenshot. The slides will go there as well. And in a few days, we'll get the recording out here from this session there as well. And then we'll have a Q&A section to follow. But if you have questions, though, if you start doing a SQL Server Health check on your own and you want to ask a question, send me an email. It's mike@straightpathsql.com. Just let me know you came to this session, and I'm happy to answer your questions and make sure you head off in the right direction. I am the sales guy here, but I'm not a sales guy. I want to help you with your SQL Server problems, whether you give us business or not. And make sure we're not sliding ahead here. All right. So about the format is, if someone wants to, on the Straight Path side, I just want to let me know in my internal chat, if you guys see about the format, just make sure the slides are advancing right. That should be what you see. It is. All right. And cool. And if you have questions, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A section throughout this, and our team will be reviewing these questions, and we'll have some time to answer the questions at the end of the session as well. So we have an hour. The first 30 or so minutes are going to be this slide. We're going to talk about the SQL Server Health checks we do and the things we see. And then at the end of this, we're going to have an office hours style conversation where we'll talk about questions you've brought up in the Q&A section, or comments we have from health checks we've done. We won't out any of our customers for problems with that they have specifically. But again, we see a lot of the same things at big companies, small companies, banks, hospitals, small mom and pop shops. We see the same kind of problems from time to time, you could say. So what is a SQL Server Health check? Well, my introduction was way back when. Some folks here might remember that term, a SQL Ranger, I think is what they called them. That was basically the sort of PFEs, the premier field engineers who would come out on site and perform health checks, or they call them RAPs, or SQL RAPs, rapid assessment something program, maybe they come and they tell you what's good, what's bad, and then tell you what to do about it. So when we do a health check at Straight Path, we kind of glance on the what's good. We like to give some praise, but you're not paying us to give false assurance and hope. You're paying us to fix problems. So we want to point out the things that are bad. So we really zero in on a health check on what's bad, how to fix what's bad, and then prioritize the order of fixes for you. Because a lot of times in a health check, there's many things wrong. Some of them are kind of important. Some of them are less important. And we want you to know which ones are which. So why should you do a SQL Server Health check? Well, pretty simple. It's best to be proactive and preventative and do some planning. I like P's, I guess. And we want to keep your environment well-tuned and running. This is things that my doctor, my dentist, my mechanic, all the small engines that we use at my farm would actually love. The reality of what we do with SQL Server Health checks is people call us up. Most of our customers call us up and say, help, something hurts. Very rarely do we get a customer that calls up and says, hey, our SQL Server is running okay. Can you tell us what's good and what's bad? So that's kind of how I treat my teeth, my body, my cars, and the small engines. I kind of wait till something goes wrong. But in order to know what's broken or how to fix it, you have to know what's broken first. And that's what the health check does. So hopefully you're here not with specific problems, but you just want to know how your SQL Server is. And that's what this is for. You can do your own SQL Server Health check. Yes, we do services. Yes, we sell services. But on the links, and again, all the links from these slides, just to reiterate, are going to be, I'll put into the everyone chat. I see that somebody shared it, but they only shared it internally. It just went out to everybody. There's a blog post I have in my blog from yesterday, which actually have all the links in here. So you don't have to worry about clicking these links. But you can do your own SQL Server Health check. And I have a lot of content on my blog about how to do it. And there's lots of tools out there from the internet. Brent Dozar's tools, Glenn Berry scripts are great. There's things in DBA tools, PowerShell module that you can use. There are many, many ways to do these. The trick is to do it and to start focusing on something. So check out that link in the list of links and start looking at doing your own SQL Server Health check. So before we get into it, I just want to have a quick admission. If you ever had a home inspection done when you're selling a home, the home inspectors find sort of a few kinds of problems, and we do too. There's actual problems like these, like your roof is falling apart and it has 6 months of life left. That's kind of a big deal. That's a super critical and going to make a gigantic difference fix. That would be something like you're not doing backups, for instance, which you may laugh, but we see all the time. Important. So this is like, hey, your electrical service is 100 amp and it should be 200 amp because your breakers are stretched out. It's important and it's hurting a little bit. It could in the future. For SQL Server, that's going to be maybe your CPU is running in balance mode. There's things we find that maybe aren't that big of a deal at all, but I put this in the middle because the auditors care about it. That would be like, hey, your SQL Server is listening on port 1433. I don't really care about that because the people who are looking for the SQL servers in your network, they don't care at port. They're going to scan all the ports anyway. But some auditor someplace is saying you have to do it. So we have to sometimes do things to make the auditors happy. And I know a few of our customers are here, and I know a few of you are in industries where the auditors sort of tell you what to do and they kind of run the show. There are some things that are kind of a big deal, but not really a big deal. Like I can't think of a good home inspection one, but maybe you don't have a proper drip edge someplace on a gutter or something. I don't know. It's there, and we should look at it. And then there's something that's something we should talk about planning. Like, hey, why are you still on SQL Server 2016? So the point though is there's a lot of things that are subjective. The 7 things we're going to talk about today are not subjective. These are things that if these are not good, your environment is not good. So what are they? Well, rather than list them here, this is the list we're going to talk about today and the list we talk about on that blog post. But missing backups, integrity checks, CPUs running in balance mode, or your servers running in balance power mode, max memory is not set. Nobody's watching your SQL Server. That happens all the time. You're not patching, you're not upgrading. You have bad server config or VM config or cluster config, and we'll talk about that as well. So let's get into it. Missing backups. Remember, these are the findings that we want to stop seeing and the findings that you can actually make a difference about right now. I would be perfectly happy if we didn't make money ever again because somebody didn't have backups, because those are really hard conversations. I've actually lost track the number of times we've seen this, and big companies and small companies, really important companies with really important data as well. I won't name the industries, but you name the vertical, and we've probably seen them missing backups. It's actually made me fearful as a consumer and a person who does banking and gets checked up from time to time from the doctors. Just surprising the folks who don't have good backups. But it's not just missing backups. It's also not understanding backups. We see a lot of people that wind up with what they think are backups because they say, oh, don't worry, the SAN team is doing our snapshots, or the VM team is doing our snapshots, but they're not actually taking SQL aware snapshots. And then when the bad moment, when the bad stuff hits the fan, they can't recover because they have a backup that doesn't actually restore. They'll restore the snapshot and end up with a corrupt database because the MDFs and LDFs, or data files and log files, are not lined up. So that's kind of a bad thing. And we at StraightPath believe you have to have what we call a corruption resistant backup strategy. And again, all the links, just to reiterate, are on that post. But really, a corruption resistant backup strategy we'll talk about in the next slide when we talk about not doing check DBs. But if you have databases in full recovery model, which means you can recover to a point in time, and you take full backups, we like differentials too. So maybe a weekly full and daily diffs is our typical backup strategy. That may or may not work for you depending on your data and your server needs. And then log backups, and keeping all of those backups between good check DB. So you don't want to remove your backups until you know you have a good, healthy check DB. If you do that, you can recover from corruption with minimal and potentially no data loss, really no data loss. You might have some downtime while you do restores, but you're going to be in a much better world. We'll talk about corruption in a moment. Unfortunately, we see that a lot. You attending this may never see corruption in your SQL Server career. It's very possible to not see corruption if you work in one place for your whole career and you have a pretty simple environment and your storage is perfect and your machines are perfect. You never have power failures and no bugs from SQL Server or Windows or your storage drivers, and you're not using this VM tool and this storage tool and this snapshot tool and all these components, which can lead to corruption. We see it a lot because we're consultants, and it's never good when we see it. Sometimes our answer to customers is, cool, we can fix it. Sometimes it's, how's your backups? And based on their answer, our answer is sometimes, well, you're going to lose some data. It's just a question of how much. Which brings us to integrity. So we want to always be checking the database integrity. As frequently as we can. We tend to do weekly. If I go back a slide, the frequency really is determined by your backup, what you retain for backups. I'm trying to say your backup retention. So if you retain backups for a full week, all your backups, including your log backups, between good check DBs, then a weekly cadence is fine. If you don't have the space for that, I would fight hard to get the space for that, and say, why don't you have the space for your backups? It's really important. But you want to make sure you're doing these check DBs. We do them weekly for our clients, probably 95% of the time. So DBCC check DB is a process that will actually look at every single page of data, every 8 kilobyte page of data in your SQL Server database, and it will ask it, are you corrupt? Are all of your bits where they're supposed to be? And if they aren't, you get an error message in your check DB, and you're into restore land if you are doing a corruption resistant backup strategy. And there's 3 ways you're going to find corruption. One of them is doing a check DB, and that's how we prefer it. Well, ideally we'd never find it, but we prefer to find it doing a check DB. You might catch it on a backup if you're doing backup with checksum, which we recommend in the links that you'll see on the posts on our blog. You'll see information about doing backups, and we do recommend backup with checksum. You might find a corruption in the backup process when the checksum fails, not always though. And then the time when we see corruption, most often when people call us up and say, hey, can you guys consult for us? It's not typically with number one, because a lot of clients aren't doing check DB. It's not because number 2, because a lot of clients aren't using checksum. It's often number 3, where a user is running something and they get this error message, and it's not a good time. So do check DBs. That's the thing we want you to do. Again, we're happy to tell you about it on a health check that we do, but I would rather you find the corruption first, and you do the check DBs, so we can actually help you with the more advanced and fun things to do. Performance. I just got done doing a health check for a really, really big company the other day, and they're having some performance problems. And wouldn't you know it, their SQL Server's CPU is running in balanced mode. So their power config for their SQL Server is set to balanced mode, which means I want to save some kilowatt hours per year or per decade. The way it works is basically Windows says we're gonna downgrade, we're gonna down level your CPU performance, and if we see you needing it and you start to use it and your performance peaks, and it peaks for a little bit of time, like a second or maybe it's milliseconds, but if it peaks up, then we'll jump your CPU throughput up. We'll actually use what you paid for in your CPU. The problem is your SQL servers, and we've seen this sometimes, but your SQL server should not just be pegged at 100%. It's going to be up and down, very spiky. So quite often what happens is SQL Server gets busy, and then it starts going off the cliff and it's not busy anymore. And now the CPU says, here you go. Here's all the gigahertz you needed. It's like, I don't need it anymore. Thank you. So we've seen clients improve 10%, 15%, even 20% by just right-clicking, control panel, system, power configs, or typing in powercfg.cpl. I type it in my sleep, and going from balanced mode to high performance mode. It's free. It's easy. It doesn't need to restart. It doesn't require any approvals as far as I'm concerned. I mean, if you're working for, a big bank, you probably have to get approval and 6 months of paperwork before you can do it, but it's a free setting with no downside. So fix that before we do a health check for you. Here's another one I just saw yesterday for that same customer. They didn't have their max memory set. Anybody here, it depends on your age, you might remember Ron Popeil and his infomercial. Somebody here may not even know what an infomercial is, but Ron Popeil was this guy who had infomercials for all sorts of things. And one of them was the rotisserie chicken. And in his rotisserie chicken infomercial, he talked about how it was, and the whole audience would shout it back, set it and forget it. And SQL Server, a lot of people think is set it and forget it, because you can put the disk in. I'm showing my age now, if I'm not already showing my age and my bald head and my beard. But you download the ISO and run the install, and you click next, finish, and poof, you have a SQL Server. And then you install your QuickBooks application or whatever application you want to install, and poof, you have a production SQL Server database running on your SQL Server that nobody did any best practices on. One of those things that comes out of the box is max memory. It's gotten better in later versions of SQL. You can actually, it gives you some adjustments for these things. I'm pretty sure actually my team has to go and speak at everyone. You can tell I'm a CEO now, and I've not installed SQL Server. I don't think I've installed SQL 2019 myself. I know it asks you about MaxTop. I know it fixes TempDB. Does the installer, somebody just make sure you're in everyone from the panelists, does the installer now even ask us about max memory? I think it may, but you have to still know what you're doing and click it. It does. David Cease has told me it does. So it does, which is good, but you can still end up with it set to unlimited or two terabytes, which is effectively unlimited for most customers. So we have customers with more memory than that on servers, but it's unlimited. Not a good out of the box default. Need to go in there and check that. Again, that's a free setting. Doesn't fix anything. It doesn't cost you anything to do it. Do note though that if you make a change to this will have to run a reconfigure behind the scenes. So if you change your max degree of parallelism, cost threshold parallelism, max memory, optimize your ad hoc workloads, certain settings you change in SQL Server runs a reconfigure behind the scenes. And these settings will dump things that are in memory. So depending on your memory settings, I don't know if this will always dump things, but if you are not using all of your memory, it may not. But if you are using all of your memory, you're going to have to take something out of memory. So you're going to be potentially forcing plans and data out of cache. So there'll be a little sluggish performance after you make this setting, but it's still a free setting that you should do. The next thing we want to stop seeing are unwatched SQL servers. Now, the whole thing we do with our DBA as a service is we watch your SQL servers, and we bring a couple tools in which do daily health checks and alerting. But so many SQL servers have nothing. Like they're just sitting there, and nobody's watching it unless somebody's complaining. We see jobs that have been failing for eons. So maybe you are doing backups, which is great, good for you. But your backup job has been failing for the past 3 months. We've had clients like that before, and nobody knows because they're not getting the emails. And it's relatively easy to set up a SQL agent email alert to have an email when a job fails. It's relatively easy to set up SQL Server alerts to at least know if your SQL Server is throwing severity 17 or God forbid, severity 25 errors on a daily basis, or sort of giving you warning signs of corruption, 823s and 824 errors. So you should be setting up, at the very minimum, SQL Server agent alerts. You should be setting up emails for jobs that really matter. And when I was a production DBA way back when, in the days before my employers would spring for monitoring tools or DBA as a service companies to help me out, I would set up one email from I did daily because I didn't know the benefits of differentials back then. But I would set up a daily backup job to send me an email either way. So every day, every morning, I would have an email saying, hey, your backup succeeded. So at least I know I'm getting alerts. And if I didn't see an email, I would know, hey, the lack of an email about a failure could just be that my email program's not working or my email's not working. So set up alerts. I'm sick and tired of seeing that too. Patching and upgrading, especially nowadays, with ransomware, with viruses, with 0 days, with all of the things being fixed in SQL Server because the surface area of SQL Server has increased and everybody uses it differently. And there are bugs, there are things missed in QA. It happens, even with Microsoft. I know that's shocking to all of you if you ever use Internet Explorer. You should be patching your SQL servers. So we'll talk about upgrades separate in a second here in the same slide, but we often see, we just had a client that was SQL Server 2008, I think R2, but RTM, like a few months ago. So many things have happened between patches if you don't apply them. We prefer you to stay current, but not super current. We do not want you to just download every CU the moment it comes out. The one exception might be if it's a really critical security update and Microsoft says you better do this because there's a 0 day out there, you really have to do it. If you have a test environment, which hopefully you do it there first and wait and see. But we prefer you to wait maybe one patching cycle. So maybe don't be on the latest CU, but be on the latest CU -1. So the last CU. So when CU 14 for something comes out, deploy CU 13. I don't know why I said 13. That's an unlucky number. Let's say 15 and 14, deploy the one before it. Because if you've been paying attention to the SQL Server community and blogs for a while, you'll see that I could probably think of 4 to 6, maybe even more. And people in my team might even count more and type in the everyone chat. But there's been at least 4 to 6 kind of not small oopses from Microsoft where they released a patch and then said, wait, don't deploy that patch. Wait a second and deploy this one instead. And if you did deploy that patch, uninstall it or deploy this fix to fix the patch. So I like to just wait and let somebody else's customers experiment with the brand new patches. And again, if you get into a ransomware situation or an auditing situation, this is the kind of thing they're going to ask you. So it's like the port number that we talked about a few slides ago. We all on this call know that changing the SQL Server port number doesn't really do anything to stop anything, but the auditors might make you do it because it's something they have to do. And then you have to defend it. And let's say you have a bad situation and somebody hacked your system. You have to now answer in a courtroom. Why didn't you do this best practice? Well, same thing with patching. If you have an issue and you're not patched, that's sort of your liability. It's your company's liability, but it's also your liability as far as your job goes and as far as all that goes. So you should be patching. And the last one that we want to stop seeing are really misconfigured VMs, misconfigured servers, and misconfigured clusters. In the office hours, I'm going to ask Sandra to talk about some cluster oopses that we've seen even recently. We saw a customer just recently have a failover because they never had a file share witness or quorum. We often see VMs not set properly. I've lost track now of the number of times I've seen SQL Server Standard with 12 sockets, 1 core per socket, and 8 of the sockets not available. Therefore, they're only using 4 of their 12 CPUs they paid for because they didn't realize SQL Server Standard's limitation, and because they just clicked next in their VM console and nobody checked these things. So I'm not saying you're all bad if you make these mistakes. It's just these are the kind of settings and configs, these 7 that we've talked about, including this one, that we see all the time and have lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of documentation, blog posts, entire sessions at PASS dedicated to talking about this and other SQL Server conferences, SQL Saturdays and user groups. So these 7 things are really well advertised things that you should not have in your environment. And we don't mind finding them in the health checks and fixing them with you. We just would rather use your time to fix the things that are not so easy, the things that are a little bit more complex to find. And this is one of them. So server config, VM config, cluster config, it can go deep quick. So we'll find misconfigured cluster sometimes when it comes to timeout settings and other settings, but those are not what we're talking about. We're talking about really basic things, like you built a cluster without a quorum or a file share witness, like the cores. Those things really shouldn't exist anymore. So that's it. Those are the 7 things we want to stop seeing. On our blog post that I put in the chat a couple times, we have links to all of these things we talked about. And in the coming days, we'll actually have this recording there. And then based on what we're going to talk about in the Q&A in a moment, we'll add more links. And we have lots of links about all of these things. I'm one of the people who's been blogging about all of these things for a long time. And I didn't mention so many things like this, even this sort of running on list here at the bottom is a small list, DB compatibility levels in your databases, improper file growths found. That can matter because it can really hurt performance. Instant file initialization disabled. I found that yesterday in the same customer I was talking about that had max memory set to default, which is unlimited effectively. They had bad CTFP. They had cost structural parallelism. Their CPUs are in balance mode. And they have no non-clustered indexes, which is a different problem. That's more advanced. I mean, it's not that advanced, but it's more deep because you have to know what indexes to add. But improper trace flags, data and log files in the same drive, errors that have been there forever that nobody knew about, stack dumps quietly happening behind the scenes that don't quite restart SQL, but your SQL server is not healthy. Auto shrink, we see that still. Shrink jobs running, auto close. People who think that, and my relativity clients will know this, people who are told by their software vendors, rebuild your indexes every day, it will help. It doesn't help. So these are things we see on health checks as well. And if we had 5 hours, I give you 60 things and talk about all of those. We talk about quite a few of these on our blog as well. And we actually have a post coming out next week from David Cease on our team where he sort of takes what we have as a basic health check checklist, and he really expands on it with more things. So he talks about some of these things as well. And again, take our advice, take our wisdom that we've learned the hard way. Everybody here on the panelists, which we'll talk about in a second, we all have learned SQL Server from the School of Hard Knocks. So rather than try and learn it from the School of Hard Knocks yourself, go ahead and fix that. And by the way, this slide is not February 2019. I like that. I just noticed that. So that's, you can tell I copied from an old slideshow. But this is not presentation worst practices. So that's the main part of this session. If you have questions, dump into the Q&A, and we're going to switch over to Q&A mode in a second. But we're going to just jump to office hours. I'm going to have the panelists turn the cameras on. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We'll just sort of discuss what we talked about here. Thank you again for attending. Next month, you'll see on the blog post today, and I'll put that post out once more right now. We have a registration link for next month's topic, which is about ransomware and security, and kind of asking the question of where does the DBA fit here? And in my mind, the answer is kind of a twofold answer. If the DBA is worrying, and if they're the first person at your company worrying about ransomware and virus protection and security, there's probably something wrong in your organization with security, right? Because somebody else would be worrying about that first. But I also, this book here, it's always on my bookshelf, is Extreme Ownership. It's a book we read here at Straight Path, and the book was there. I just happened to move something to get it, but it's everybody's responsibility, right? If everybody says it's not my responsibility, then that means it's nobody's responsibility and it gets missed. So there are things that we can do as computer users, as email users, as IT citizens to help prevent and lower the surface area for attacks. Also, there are things as a DBA we can do and we can lobby hard for to try and make sure that in the event that our endpoint protection and our perimeter gets breached and ransomware does get into our environment, that at least we can get back quickly. So things like runbooks, things like offsite backups, offsite, offline, off network backups. We've seen many people with ransomware attacks have their backups destroyed, even though they're in a different data center, but they're on the same network. So we'll talk about all that kind of stuff in the webinar next month. There's a registration link for that. It'll be, I think, Thursday, the 21st of July. But anyway, you'll see it in the link that I linked there. And we'll probably have this video out maybe by Tuesday or Wednesday with more details from the session today. So I'm going to ask the panelists now to come on camera. I'm going to stop sharing. And we're going to talk about any questions that are raised. And if there are no questions, we kind of have some that we had already, and we can chat through it. So Jeff, David, Sandra, Mike, come on camera and off mute if you'd like. Oh, and I have to enable your participants, apparently. Your cameras. I thought I did. Give me a second.